chosen one. Wake up. This is not a motivational whisper. This is a warning. You are standing at a dangerous intersection where delay disguises itself as patience, and comfort pretends to be peace. Too many cycles have repeated because you kept telling yourself, tomorrow I will obey. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next year. And suddenly, years slipped through your fingers while your calling waited. This is a wake-up call, because staying asleep spiritually always comes with a cost. Not immediately, not loudly, but slowly, silently, relentlessly. You already know this feeling, the quiet unrest that follows you even on good days. The sense that something is off, that you are out of alignment. That is not anxiety. That is conviction. That is heaven tapping harder each time you ignore the knock. You were not created to blend in, to drift, or to circle the same mountain forever. Yet cycles repeat when obedience is delayed. Patterns don't break themselves. Doors don't open out of sympathy. And destiny does not chase people who keep walking in the opposite direction. Listen carefully. Every time you postpone obedience, you strengthen resistance. What was once difficult becomes familiar. What was once conviction becomes background noise. This is how people fall asleep spiritually without realizing it. They still pray, but they don't move. They still believe, but they don't obey. They still hope, but they don't surrender. And slowly, vision dulls. Discernment weakens. Urgency fades. That is the danger of delay. This is not coincidence. This moment is not random. Heaven is interrupting your scroll, your routine, your comfort, because something is at stake. You are not just delaying a blessing, you are delaying alignment, and alignment is what attracts provision, protection, and power. When alignment is missing, effort increases but results decrease. You work harder but feel emptier. You try more but advance less. That is the price of staying asleep. You have already survived things that should have broken you. That alone tells you that God's hand has been on your life. But survival is not the goal. Obedience is. You were never meant to just make it through. You were meant to move forward. And here is the truth many don't want to hear. God will not fund disobedience. He will not empower rebellion. He will not accelerate what you refuse to surrender. Grace covers mistakes. Yes, but instruction requires response. There comes a moment when mercy steps back and responsibility steps forward. Not because God is cruel, but because you are ready. You are not being pressured. You are being trusted. The warning you feel right now is proof that heaven still considers you. Silence would be more dangerous. Conviction means the door is still open, but doors do close when hesitation becomes habit. According to what is revealed in the book of Proverbs, chapter 6, verse 9. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep? These are not gentle words. They are sharp because the situation is serious. Wake up means movement. Wake up means decision. Wake up means obedience now, not later. You don't need more confirmation. You don't need another sign. You don't need permission from people who are just as stuck as you once were. What you need is courage to obey while it still costs something. Because obedience that costs nothing changes nothing. This is the moment where you either rise or repeat, where you either choose alignment or accept cycles, where you either respond or remain. You have already outgrown the environment that once felt familiar. Staying now would require shrinking your conviction, muting your discernment, and silencing the inner voice that keeps urging you forward. Growth will always feel uncomfortable before it feels rewarding. That discomfort is not danger, it is evidence that movement is required. This is the line between who you were and who you are becoming. If you step forward, resistance will rise, but so will authority. If you stay still, nothing attacks you, but nothing advances either. Obedience is the bridge. Crossing it ends repetition and begins acceleration. Do not do it. Do not go back to sleep, no matter the price. Comfort will always ask you to wait. Fear will always ask you to delay. Doubt will always ask you to negotiate. But calling does not negotiate. Calling demands response. You are one decision away from momentum and one delay away from stagnation. Chosen one, this message is not meant to scare you, it is meant to awaken you. Because once you wake up, everything changes. When obedience begins, provision follows. When movement starts, heaven funds motion. But first you must rise. If this message woke something in you, like the video, share it with someone who needs to wake up. Subscribe to stay connected. And at the very end, comment the number 77 as a sign that you are choosing obedience now. You paid a price they were unwilling to pay. And this is where the separation became permanent. While others negotiated, you surrendered. While they delayed, you moved, sometimes trembling, sometimes unsure, but still obedient. The cost was not small. You lost people who once stood close. You lost timing that seemed logical. You lost comfort, familiarity, and the safety of agreement. But what you gained was alignment, and alignment always comes before provision. There were moments you questioned yourself, nights when obedience felt like punishment instead of purpose. You watched others prosper while you struggled, and a quiet voice whispered, "Was it worth it?" That question haunted you not because you were wrong, but because obedience often looks foolish before it looks fruitful. This is the unseen cost they refused to carry. They wanted reward without refinement, elevation without separation, blessing without obedience. You endured misunderstanding. People assumed you were weak, naive, or overly spiritual. They couldn't see the battle you were fighting internally, the daily decision to choose conviction over convenience. Obedience stripped away your excuses. It exposed motives. It demanded trust when evidence was absent. And this is why many turned back. The cost felt too high, the path too narrow, the wait too long. But what they didn't understand is that delay is not neutral. When you refuse to move forward, you quietly move backward. Comfort does not preserve calling. It erodes it. Every time they chose ease, something in them dulled. Discernment weakened, hunger faded, vision blurred. You, however, were being sharpened through resistance. Pressure clarified your priorities. Loss refined your focus. Isolation deepened your hearing. There is a hidden transaction in obedience. What you lay down in faith is never lost. It is transferred. Sacrifice is not subtraction, it is redirection. You gave up what was visible to receive what was eternal. And although the cost felt unbearable at times, it created capacity. Capacity for authority, capacity for stewardship, capacity for what is coming next. You didn't just lose people. You lost versions of yourself that could not survive where you are going. Old habits, old reactions, old dependencies, they fell away because they could not coexist with obedience. That shedding was painful, but necessary. God does not build new structures on unstable foundations. What was removed made room for what must be added. There were seasons when it felt unfair. You did the right thing and still faced resistance. You chose integrity and still encountered delay. You obeyed, yet doors seemed to close instead of open. But obedience is not a transaction for immediate reward. It is a covenant for future authority. Heaven was watching how you handled loss before releasing increase. Others walked away when obedience demanded consistency. They obeyed once or twice, but retreated when the sacrifice became daily. You stayed, even when clarity faded, even when affirmation disappeared, even when results were invisible. That consistency marked you. Heaven takes note of those who obey without applause. The cost you paid rewired you. It trained you to move without validation, to trust instruction over emotion, to value alignment over approval. That is why what is coming will not intoxicate you or destroy you. You have already learned to say no to people, to opportunities, to shortcuts. That discipline is rare, and rarity always attracts responsibility. According to the voice of the prophet recorded in the first book of Kings, chapter 18, verse 21. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. This was the moment they turned back. This was the moment you stepped forward. You chose decisiveness when others chose comfort. And that decision echoed far beyond what you could see. Understand this clearly: God does not reward intention. He responds to obedience. Many intended to follow. Few actually did. Intention makes you feel spiritual. Obedience makes you effective. You crossed a line they were afraid of. And once crossed, there is no returning to who you were. That is why separation increased, not because you became arrogant, but because your frequency changed. You may still carry wounds from that season, scars from misunderstood decisions, grief from relationships that couldn't survive your obedience. But those scars are not signs of loss. They are proof of passage. They mark you as someone who has been through refinement and did not turn bitter. The cost you paid did not break you, it positioned you. And although it looked like you were falling behind, you were actually being set apart. What they refused to give up kept them where they were. What you released unlocked movement you couldn't yet see. This is the truth that will soon become undeniable. Obedience delayed your comfort, but it protected your calling. And everything protected by God is eventually funded by God. This was the season no one applauded. No announcements, no witnesses. Just you, God, and the slow grind of becoming. While others assumed nothing was happening, everything was happening. This was the hidden preparation season, the place where impatience is burned out of you and character is welded into your bones. You were not forgotten. You were being formed. God does his most precise work in obscurity. Public platforms expose what is built. Private seasons determine what survives. You were removed from noise not as punishment, but as protection. Too much visibility too early would have destroyed what was still forming. So heaven concealed you. Silence became your training ground. Waiting became your classroom. You learned how to obey without feedback, how to stay faithful without reassurance, how to move without applause. This is where many fail. They confuse silence with absence. But God is often quiet when he is closest. The roots go deepest where no one can see them. That depth is what allows weight later. Without it, elevation becomes collapse. There were days when the preparation felt excessive. Why so much delay? Why so much pruning? Why so many closed doors? Because what you are being prepared for cannot be sustained by shallow strength. God was not just preparing a blessing, he was preparing a bearer. You were being trained to handle provision without worshiping it, influence without abusing it, and authority without losing humility. You were stripped of shortcuts, forced to confront motives, pressed to choose obedience even when no one would ever know if you didn't. That integrity matters. Heaven records what people overlook. Angels take note when you choose right in private. Those decisions accumulate, they compound, they build trust between you and God. Preparation is uncomfortable because it exposes weakness. You faced parts of yourself you had avoided. Fear, control, pride disguised as independence. God touched areas others never saw. He dismantled coping mechanisms. He disrupted patterns that once kept you safe but would later keep you small. What felt like loss was actually liberation. You were trained to hear God clearly, not just in moments of crisis, but in daily discipline. Obscurity sharpened your discernment. With fewer voices around you, His voice grew louder, clearer, more precise. That clarity will soon save you time, money, and unnecessary battles. Many who rise quickly fall just as fast because they never learned to listen. You did. This season also tested your faithfulness with little, small assignments, quiet obedience, repetitive tasks. Nothing glamorous, nothing impressive. But heaven weighs faithfulness, not visibility. If you can be trusted with the unseen, you can be trusted with the seen. That is why preparation is non-negotiable. As was spoken in the sacred writings of old, we are reminded in the book of James, chapter 1, verse 12. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because, having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love Him. Notice what is promised: not escape, but a crown. Not avoidance of testing, but reward after endurance. What you endured was not wasted, it was counted. You were not being delayed, you were being reinforced. Every unanswered prayer refined your trust. Every closed door trained your patience. Every quiet day strengthened your endurance. You are more stable now than you realize. Less reactive, more discerning, harder to manipulate. That stability is critical for what comes next. That reinforcement changed how you respond to pressure. What once triggered fear now activates wisdom. What once demanded reaction now invites discernment. You no longer rush to prove yourself or explain your path. You have learned restraint, timing, and silence. These are not passive traits. They are marks of authority. Only those prepared for greater weight are trained to stand steady when everything else shakes. Others would have cracked under this pressure. They needed constant affirmation, immediate results, emotional highs. You learned how to function without them. That maturity is rare. It is also expensive, and anything expensive is valuable. The hidden season is where identity becomes unshakable. You no longer need external validation to know who you are. You no longer chase platforms to feel relevant. You no longer beg for recognition. That internal security will keep you grounded when doors open suddenly. This is why the next phase won't overwhelm you. You have already been tested in silence. You have already survived waiting. You have already proven faithful when nothing was promised. Preparation did its work. If this mirrors the season you survived, comment still standing, not as a trend, not as noise, but as a quiet witness that you endured when quitting would have been easier. Now the pattern becomes clear. Obedience does not just lead to survival, it activates supply. And to understand what God is doing in your life now, you must look at a story forged in famine, pressure, and impossible odds. This is the moment where heaven's funding begins to move, not because resources are abundant, but because obedience is present. There was a season of drought in the land. No rain, no growth, no margin, scarcity everywhere. And into that scarcity, God sent the prophet Elijah, not to a palace, not to wealth, but to a widow in Zarephath. She was already at the end. She had no reserves, no backup, no safety net, just enough flour for one last meal, one final attempt before surrendering to death. This is important because divine provision rarely shows up where abundance already exists. It shows up where obedience is the only currency left. Elijah did not arrive with money. He arrived with a word, and that word sounded unreasonable. He asked her to give first to feed him before herself and her son. From a natural perspective, this request made no sense. It challenged logic, instinct, and fear all at once. Yet this is how God tests alignment. He asks for obedience at the point of greatest pressure. The widow could have refused. She had every justification. Scarcity, responsibility, fear. But she obeyed anyway, not because she had excess, but because she trusted the word spoken over her situation. And that single act unlocked a supply that defied economics. The jar did not run dry. The oil did not fail. Day after day, provision appeared not in surplus but in sufficiency. Enough for today, enough for tomorrow, enough to survive a famine. This is how heaven funds obedience. Not always in bulk, not always in advance, but always on time. God did not give her a warehouse. He gave her a flow, and flow requires trust. You cannot hoard it. You cannot control it. You must wake up each day and believe that obedience yesterday still speaks today. As the prophet Elijah declared in the first book of Kings in chapter 17, verse 14, "The jar of flour will not be used up and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." Notice the promise. Provision tied to time, supply linked to obedience. Not endless ease, but sustained care through the dry season. This is where your story intersects with hers. God is not funding your life because conditions are perfect. He is funding your life because obedience has positioned you correctly. You obeyed when resources were low. You trusted when answers were unclear. You gave when it felt risky. And now, heaven is releasing provision that cannot be explained by logic alone. Funding does not always look like sudden wealth. Sometimes it looks like doors opening at the right moment, ideas arriving just in time, help appearing unexpectedly, strength renewed daily, needs met without excess, but without lack. This kind of provision trains you to rely on God, not money, to trust flow, not stockpiles. The widow's obedience did more than sustain her, it sustained the prophet. Her yes fed a calling bigger than herself. This is another truth when God funds you. It is never just for you. Your obedience becomes supply for others. Your stability becomes shelter. Your provision becomes purpose. Elijah stayed in her house for the duration of the famine. The place of obedience became the place of habitation. When you align with God's instruction, you don't just receive provision, you host presence. That presence changes atmosphere. Fear leaves, hope returns, order is restored. Order is, you are stepping into a similar season, not one of extravagance, but of divine reliability. You may not see years ahead, but you will see today clearly. You may not have surplus, but you will not have lack. And as long as you remain obedient, the flow continues. This is why distraction must be avoided now. Fear will tell you to hoard. Control will tell you to rush. Comparison will tell you that others have more. But obedience teaches you to trust the rhythm of heaven. Daily bread, daily instruction, daily provision. If this message is bringing clarity to what you're walking through, take a moment quietly and sincerely to like and share it with someone who feels stuck in scarcity. And if you haven't yet, subscribe so you stay connected to these moments of alignment. This isn't about numbers, it's about reminding the right people that God still provides in famine. The widow did not escape the drought. She survived it with divine supply. And so will you. Obedience did not remove pressure, but it guaranteed provision within it. That is the kind of funding God releases. Not flashy, not fragile, but faithful. You are not late. You are not forgotten. You are positioned. And just like the jar that never emptied, what God has assigned to sustain you will continue until the season changes. This is the part many people resist, because it feels quieter than miracles and slower than breakthroughs. Yet it is one of the most powerful instructions heaven gives. Learn how to release what once worked and allow God to heal what still bleeds inside you. Provision does not flow freely through cluttered vessels. Before God funds the next season, He cleans the inside. There are habits you built in survival seasons that once kept you alive. They were useful. They were necessary. They were even wise for that time. But seasons change, and what protected you then may restrict you now. Holding on to an old pattern simply because it once helped you is a subtle form of disobedience. Growth requires discernment to know when to let go without resentment. Releasing a habit does not mean it was sinful or wrong. It means it has completed its assignment. Some coping mechanisms were created under pressure. Some routines were formed in trauma. Some mindsets were forged when trust was unsafe. God honors how you survived, but He does not want you to remain in survival mode forever. Peace requires a different posture. Letting go in peace means you stop fighting to maintain what God is quietly asking you to loosen. You don't demonize the habit. You don't shame yourself for having it. You simply acknowledge this no longer serves who I am becoming. And then you place it down gently without fear. That is maturity. That, at the same time, healing old wounds is not optional in this season. You cannot carry unresolved pain into sustained provision. Pain leaks. It distorts perception. It hardens reactions. It sabotages trust. God may bless you despite wounds, but He will not promote you without addressing them. Inner cleanliness protects outer stability. Healing begins with honesty, not with reliving trauma endlessly, but with naming it accurately. Some of your reactions are not personality traits, they are scar responses. Some of your defenses are not discernment, they are unhealed memories. God does not expose these things to shame you, but to free you. Light is not an enemy, it is a cleanser. Forgiveness may be required not as agreement with what happened, but as a release of its control. Unforgiveness keeps wounds active. It ties today's decisions to yesterday's injuries. When you forgive, you are not excusing the pain. You are removing its authority over your future. That act alone can unclog years of stagnation. This inner work feels slow, but it accelerates everything else. Once the inside is clear, direction becomes sharper. Peace becomes consistent. Discernment strengthens. You stop reacting and start responding. That shift changes how resources find you. God funds clarity. He funds wholeness. He funds vessels that can hold weight without cracking. This is also where you stop confusing rest with avoidance. True rest comes after release. When you let go of habits rooted in fear and heal wounds rooted in pain, rest follows naturally. Your nervous system settles. Your spirit steadies. You become harder to rush, harder to manipulate, harder to derail. That stability is essential for long-term provision. According to what is written in the book of Isaiah, chapter 1, verse 16, "Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight, stop doing wrong." This is not just about behavior, it is about cleansing. God invites you to participate in the cleaning process, not with guilt, but with willingness. Clean vessels carry more without contamination. You may notice resistance rising as you do this work. Old emotions surface. Familiar habits call you back. That is normal. Release is a process, not a single moment. Each time you choose peace over familiarity, healing over avoidance, you reinforce the new direction. Heaven sees consistency more than intensity. This is how God prepares you to steward what is coming. Funding without healing creates pressure. Provision without peace creates anxiety. Increase without inner clarity creates chaos. God is too intentional to do that to you. He loves you enough to slow you down here so you don't self-destruct later. You are not losing anything valuable in this process. You are shedding weight. You are clearing residue. You are making space. What replaces these habits and healed wounds will not be emptiness, it will be peace, clarity, and capacity. If you are choosing to release what no longer fits and allow God to heal you from the inside, comment the number 888, not as superstition but as a marker that you are choosing alignment, peace, and inner cleanliness in this season. Elevation rarely arrives without separation. Before God lifts you, He lightens you. Before He expands your territory, He clarifies your environment. This is the phase where relationships shift, access changes, and familiar dynamics quietly dissolve. Not because you have done something wrong, but because what sustained you before cannot accompany you forward. Separation does not always come dramatically. Sometimes it happens through distance, silence, or a slow fading of connection. Conversations feel strained. Alignment weakens. Shared language disappears. You notice that what once energized you now drains you. This is not rejection, it is redirection. God is reorganizing your surroundings to match your next level of responsibility. People are not removed because they are bad. Many are removed because they are comfortable. Comfort resists change. Comfort prefers predictability over purpose. And purpose demands growth. Those who are unwilling to grow with you will unconsciously work against where you are going, not out of malice, but out of limitation. This season can feel lonely. Separation often masquerades as isolation. You wonder why support feels thinner just as things are beginning to shift, but isolation sharpens discernment. Without constant influence, your decisions become cleaner. Your hearing becomes clearer. Your dependence returns to God instead of people. That recalibration is essential. God separates before He elevates because elevation magnifies everything. If insecurity remains, it grows louder. If people-pleasing survives, it becomes bondage. If misalignment lingers, it becomes sabotage. Separation is mercy. It prevents unnecessary damage later by addressing misfit now. You may notice that some people misunderstand your silence. Others misinterpret your boundaries. Some even accuse you of changing. They are not wrong, you are changing. Growth always looks like loss to those who benefited from the old version of you. But maturity requires choosing alignment over approval. This is also the season where God restricts access. Not everyone gets to speak into your decisions anymore. Not every invitation deserves a yes. Not every opinion requires a response. Selectivity is not arrogance, it is stewardship. You are learning to protect focus because focus attracts provision. Elevation requires clarity, and clarity demands fewer voices. When too many perspectives compete, direction blurs. God simplifies your environment so instruction can land without distortion. What feels like shrinking is actually refinement. There is grief in this process. You mourn what was familiar. You remember shared history. You question whether you're being too firm, too distant, too serious. But obedience often feels lonely before it feels fruitful. Trust that what God removes, He replaces not always with people immediately, but with peace, confidence, and strength. Separation also exposes motives. You begin to see who was connected to you for access rather than alignment, who celebrated you conditionally, who only supported you when it served them. This revelation is painful, but necessary. God does not elevate people who cannot discern loyalty, as was spoken through the apostle in the book of 2 Corinthians 1 chapter 6, verse 17. Therefore come out from them and be separate, says the Lord. Touch no unclean thing, and I will receive you. This is not about superiority, it is about consecration. Separation invites divine reception. When you step away from what contaminates focus, God steps closer with clarity. Elevation changes how you carry yourself. You become slower to speak, quicker to listen, less reactive, more intentional. That maturity is forged here, in the quiet decisions to walk away rather than argue, to release rather than cling, to trust rather than control. God is teaching you that access is earned, not assumed. As He prepares to open new doors, He closes old ones not to trap you, but to keep you from going backward. Closed doors behind you are protection, not punishment. This season also strengthens your identity. When fewer people affirm you, you learn to stand without applause. When fewer voices agree, you learn to trust conviction. That inner stability is critical. Elevation without identity leads to collapse. God will not risk that with you. What feels like loss is actually filtration. God is removing friction before momentum increases. He is clearing interference before acceleration. Once elevation happens, movement is faster. There is less time to negotiate boundaries then. That is why separation comes first. You are not being diminished, but you are being defined. The circle may be smaller, but it is cleaner. The path may be narrower, but it is clearer. And the weight you are about to carry requires exactly this level of refinement. Elevation is coming, but it will rest on what survives this separation, and what survives will be strong enough to last. Now you arrive at the place few ever reach, not because they were uninvited, but because they would not endure the journey. This is not a moment of hype. It is a state of alignment. Your life begins to move with a different rhythm now, because obedience is no longer something you struggle to choose. It is something you have become. And when obedience becomes your nature, provision becomes your partner. You are no longer fighting yourself to obey. What once required effort now flows naturally because alignment has reshaped your instincts. Your decisions come from clarity, not pressure. This inner agreement is why resistance weakens. There is no fracture inside you for opposition to exploit anymore. Provision follows this kind of wholeness quietly but consistently. Not rushed, not forced. It settles into your life because nothing in you resists stewardship now. You have become trustworthy under weight, calm under increase, and steady under responsibility, and that steadiness sustains everything God entrusts to you. God is not funding a season for you, He is funding a way of life. This is the difference. Seasons end, assignments evolve, but sustained supply follows sustained alignment. You are entering a phase where overflow is not accidental, emotional, or impulsive. It is maintained, governed, protected. You have been trained to carry it without letting it carry you. What you step into now is not flashy. It is reliable. Doors open without striving. Needs are met without panic. Opportunities align without manipulation. This is not luck, it is trust. Heaven trusts you because you proved faithful when no one was watching, obedient when no one clapped, consistent when quitting would have been easier. You no longer chase provision. Provision recognizes you. It flows toward stability, not desperation, toward clarity, not chaos, toward stewards, not spenders. And stewardship has been carved into you through every delay, every pruning, every season of silence. You learn to value sustainability over speed, depth over noise, purpose over applause. This is also where legacy becomes visible. God does not fund ego. He funds impact. What He places in your hands now has weight because it is meant to outlive moments. Your obedience did not just secure your future, it secured pathways for others. Your yes shifted bloodlines. Your consistency broke patterns. Your restraint created room for generational blessing. You will notice that your relationship with money, time, and influence is different now. You are no longer impressed by access alone. You discern fruit. You no longer rush into alignment. You test spirits. You no longer fear lack. You trust flow. That maturity keeps supply steady. Challenges will still come, but they will not shake you the way they once did. You have history with God now. Memory of provision. Evidence of faithfulness. You don't panic at resistance, because you've learned that opposition often confirms direction. What once would have discouraged you now sharpens you. This is what it means to be crowned with sustained supply. Not a crown of gold, but a crown of responsibility. Authority without arrogance. Provision without excess. Influence without corruption. God entrusts more to those who are not intoxicated by more. You have already proven that increase will not pull you away from Him. According to the ancient words recorded in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verse 18. But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. This is the anchor. You remember the source, so the stream stays clean. You remember who empowered you, so pride never poisons provision. You remember why you were funded, so purpose never gets replaced by comfort. Your obedience is no longer reactive, it is reflexive. And that is why the supply continues. God does not micromanage those who are aligned. He partners with them, walks with them, trusts them. You are stepping into that partnership now. You may still be misunderstood, still be envied, still be questioned. But you no longer need to explain your life to people who did not walk the road with you. Your fruit will speak, your peace will speak, your consistency will speak, and the right people will recognize the grace on your life without needing persuasion. This is where your story quietly becomes testimony. Not shouted, not forced, but undeniable. People will ask how you remained steady when others collapsed, how you stayed clear when others compromised, how you kept moving when others stalled, and you will know the answer was never brilliance, it was obedience. If this journey has resonated with you, if you see your own story unfolding through these words, take a moment to like this message and share it with someone who is still questioning whether obedience is worth the cost. And if you haven't yet, subscribe not for content, but for connection. This space exists to remind the chosen ones that alignment always leads to provision. You are not stepping into something fragile. You are stepping into something sustained. And as long as obedience remains your foundation, supply will remain your companion. This is not the end. This is establishment. You don't need to rush away from this moment. Let it settle. Let it breathe. Some messages are meant to be consumed quickly, but this one was meant to be carried quietly, like a seed planted beneath the surface. What happens next doesn't require an announcement. It requires awareness, small choices, daily alignment, continued obedience in ordinary moments. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. The work has already been done in private. What unfolds from here will speak for itself in timing, in provision, in peace. You'll recognize it not by noise, but by steadiness, not by pressure, but by clarity. Life will feel less frantic, more intentional, less reactive, more anchored. There may still be questions ahead. There may still be moments of uncertainty. But uncertainty no longer threatens you, it simply invites trust. You've learned how to move without full visibility, how to stay aligned even when the path bends. That skill will serve you well in the days ahead. Nothing about this journey needs to be forced. Alignment attracts what belongs. What is meant for you will recognize you. What isn't will quietly fall away. And that's okay. You are not here to chase everything, only to steward what's been entrusted to you. If this message found you at the right time, let that be enough. And if you feel led gently, without pressure, you can like or share it so someone else who's quietly walking their own path might feel less alone. But whether you do or not, what matters most is what happens after the screen goes dark. Carry this forward calmly. Stay obedient, stay clear, stay grounded. The next chapter doesn't need an ending, it's already unfolding.